I guess that it is for now. I am happy to introduce our keynote speaker, Anna Brandberg, with the very first talk for today, the psychology of play, the power of understanding your players. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. So, first up, housekeeping. Please make sure you've turned your phones off. The next thing is that I am aware that I talk faster than I play Mortal Kombat, but please be kind to me. I'm doing my best. I'm going to try to speak slow. Also, a disclaimer that I do mostly for the sake of my own mental health. Please remember, I am not an authority. I don't know everything. I will be mentioning games sometimes that I have not worked on. If you've worked on one of those games, don't hate me. But also, we're all learning every day. I am still not an expert, and I will probably never be one. And we try and remind ourselves that we're all works in progress. Cool. So, that's me. I'm a UX designer. And that means that my occupational hazard is that barely a single day passes where I'm able to use a product or interact with a thing without losing my mind and making it everyone else's problem around me, because it's so obvious that the thing that people created, they didn't test it, they didn't try it themselves. Obvious examples, things that have a simple purpose, and I don't know how to use it. How many times have you ordered something and the instruction leaflet is completely incomprehensible, and you're standing there staring at this leaflet going, you had one job. This is my personal favorite. Scissors packaging that requires scissors to open. So yeah, I'm a UX designer, which means I'm professionally angry. And I usually end up like this. That's my natural state. But being a UX designer means that I get to do some pretty fun things. And I'm currently working on a game called Metal Hellsinger. And some of you may have seen me at Gamescom last year, even if you may not necessarily have known that that was me. I cosplayed as the Unknown during the Metal Hellsinger release concert that we had during Gamescom. And if you hang out on the internet, you might also perhaps have come across some of my content and know of me as that weirdo that points at stuff. Yeah. Moving on. So, work on Metal Hellsinger, but before then, I actually started off in board games many years ago, and then moved to Australia and tripped and fell into the digital games industry. And The Sims was an amazing game to start working on because I learned so much. I realized that I knew absolutely nothing. I mean, I still don't, but that was super formative. Moved on to Need for Speed. And then an offer from King on Candy Crush brought me back to Sweden. I am Swedish originally. I'll get to that in a second. But then after that, did a little stint at at The Outsiders, working on Metal for a few months, moved on to a little project called Project Curie, and then Funcom decided they wanted me back, so I came straight back and worked on Conan for a little bit before moving back onto Metal Hellsinger. And in case people aren't familiar with Funcom, these are some of the games that we're currently working on Dune as well, which I'm personally very excited about. But a little about me, so geography lesson time. My dad is from Sweden. My mum is Portuguese. I was born in Malawi. I grew up in a country called Eswatini, known as Swaziland. And my parents live in Mozambique. And my home, I still accidentally call it Melbourne, my home, because I lived there for a long time. And I currently live and work in Stockholm. By the way, useless trivia, for those of you like me who remember everything except the important stuff. Mozambique, only country in the world that, whose name contains all 5 vowels. The more you know. So, thanks. Years ago, when I first started going to games conferences, I was that bright-eyed, bushy-tailed game dev hoping to learn enough and have enough brilliant ideas to skyrocket my career and dreaming of pivotal connections that would lead me my dream job, make games that would top the lists and amass all the knowledge and create the best game and win all the awards. And many of you sitting in the audience today at DevCom 2023, this might be what you're thinking too for this week. So often, the focus is on ourselves and our own talent and our own achievements and making our own big special game that's going to change the world. But in fact, what I'm going to talk to you about today is the opposite of that. Sorry. Unfortunately, I have some bad news for you. I'm going to tell you to stop focusing on yourself entirely and in fact start thinking about someone else. Some hard-to-swallow pills. It's not about you. Making successful games often has very little to do with how good you are at your particular craft. And I know that straight after I've spent a full 5 minutes talking about myself, it's deeply painful, the awkward segue of saying that you shouldn't be talking about yourself and thinking of yourself. And trust me, I'm very good at making things about me. But often, as game devs, we go, but of course, I know stuff. But I say it again, it's literally not about you. So, what we'll be talking about today, I'm going to talk about understanding players, the people who it's actually about. So, the why. Why do we want to do that? Then we'll talk about pride and playability. So, the thing that I want to do and that I'm super proud of and how that turns out in reality. And then we'll talk about what to do about those things. So, evolution by exploration. UX buzzwords. Yay. Cool. So, understanding players. Why bother? We'll start off with a game that I worked on. So, when I first started in games, let's be real, back in the day, growing up, in the PC version of The Sims, death wasn't just a feature, it was an art form. From trapping Belagoth in a one-by-one room without doors to accidentally removing ladders from pools. Every single one of you who giggled at that, you're all bad people. Don't get me wrong, so am I. We all did it. Those of you who say that you didn't do it and you would never do such a thing, sure, babe. So, it seems like a natural step for the team on the mobile version of The Sims to introduce the Grim Reaper to the mobile version of the game too, and realized very quickly that it was not such a great move. And think about it, when you create the PC version of the game, that's different. You choose to introduce death when you want, most of the time, but that became a fun element and that was your agency. But the game mechanic that we introduced was not based on player agency. And if you think about who is it that people first create in The Sims, they create themselves. They create people they love. They create life stories and sometimes people that may have passed away. And so introducing death in a situation where they were not in control can be deeply traumatic in a way that the team, I joined during that period, but I can't take all the credit for a wonderful game. But we all thought it was going to be a great thing and realized that it didn't quite turn out like that. And we soon realized that our vision didn't quite align with the player vision. And so after a little while, obviously taking player feedback into consideration, we updated the feature several times in iterations, and eventually, 3 whole years later, we made the ability to reverse death completely free for everyone. Something that universal healthcare hasn't quite figured out yet, but I'm pretty sure that they're working on it. But what we have to remember is that the people playing our games are people, and it's so easy for us to focus on the numbers, how well our games are doing, what's our ratings, what's all the numbers, your KPI, your daily revenue, your player retention, your engagement, all of those things. But I have an absolutely world-shattering secret for you. Behind each of those numbers is a person. All those numbers that people are so focused on at work, they're people. And I know, shocking, and I find it hard to comprehend, really, that we as companies still need to keep reminding ourselves that we should care about people. But if you consider the fact that user needs are business needs, it is important and crucial to realize that when we think about, how are we going to get those numbers up, what do you think is going to do that? Think about the people. What is that people want in your game? Not what you want, it's what your players want. And meeting business needs is done by meeting your user needs. And meeting user needs equals business success. Also, good usability is good accessibility. People often think that good accessibility is kind of tacked on at the end, but it's a thing that you can think about throughout, and I'll touch on this a little bit later on. But there's good financial reason as well. There's good business success in good accessibility. You can look at God of War as a very recent example of a team that prioritized good accessibility, and that was good business. So, a good way to think about other people's experiences, a good way to get your team to stop centering themselves and think about, okay, well, what do our users need, is to use user journeys. Inventory check. Anyone who here has used user journeys? Yay, that's far more than I was expecting. That's real good. So, as a player, I want intuitive tutorials so that I can learn game mechanics naturally without becoming overwhelmed. And this helps us think about, if I was a player, how would I want these things to be designed? And it helps us decenter ourselves. And they don't just need to be limited to games. User stories are great for all kinds of situations where you quickly want people to imagine themselves in a different scenario than where they're in currently. So, speaking of conferences then, as a conference attendee, I want name badges to be legible from a distance so that I don't have to squint awkwardly at people's chests. Or, as a keynote speaker, I want at least one person in the audience to nod encouragingly at me occasionally, please, so that I can zone in on you and pretend that the others aren't here. It's just you and me, and we're just having a little chat. Does anyone follow this account, by the way? Cool. This is one of my favorite parts of the internet, and they created a meme format that naturally I, as a UX designer, made my entire personality. So, yes. Thinking about players. What is it that players want? We all know the story, big studio makes big fancy things, and we're all so excited about what it is we do, and we're so in it, and there's an endless amount of things, and we realize if you were to ask players what they want, they'll tell you. Players just want to, like in our game, make demon go bang. That's it. Very simple. And it's important to remind yourself, you're not designing your game for yourself. Sorry. Yes, Correct. You're not designing games for yourself, you're designing them for your players. And how is your game going to be successful if nobody wants to play it? And so often, we're so focused on our game design, and we want these big, intricate things, and it turns out that players just want something completely different. And the experience that you designed might not actually be the experience that players want. As a player, I want long-winded NPCs to walk either slightly faster or slightly slower than my character's pace, so that I can remember that patience is a virtue, especially when it's being tested. As a player, I want a plethora of in-game books, scrolls, and notes with content that doesn't advance the story, so that I can appreciate the game writer's unpublished novel excerpts. Gentle reminder. So, a great example in a world of game dev where our personal visions and creative genius can sometimes cloud the bigger picture, let's take a moment to look at one of the best examples of listening to your players from gaming history. So The Sims was actually inspired by architecture and urban design. It was visualized as a digital dollhouse, but during playtests, players were more interested in the stories that they could weave between their characters than the structures that they built. And so recognizing this, the developers shifted their focus to simulating human behaviors and interactions, putting the individual emphasis on individual sim personalities with their diverse needs and desires. Pivoting. But they didn't just discard the original idea entirely. So Plumbobs, the architect thing that they use to gauge if something is going straight down to the ground or not, that's still in there. There's little quirky green diamonds over the Sims' head. They're called a plumbob. So still have a little homage, a little callback to the original concept. But it's a good reminder that sometimes we need to step back and let go of our pride and pivot what we're making based on player behavior and player feedback. These are all great examples of games that have a strong relationship with their player community, and they've had their good days, they've had their bad days. They have all admitted that, sometimes they missed the mark, or sometimes they didn't do things perfectly. Guess what? We're all human. We all make mistakes. We all mean well. We all have good intent, often. But it's important to have that open dialogue. These developers are great examples of teams that take direct feedback from players, leading to substantial updates and changes throughout the years based on what they've learned in their ongoing dialogue with the player base. And so, user research, important. One of the key pillars of UX really is user-centered design. So it is, for those of you who might not be familiar already, it's a design philosophy and process that prioritizes the user's needs and preferences and context. And in the terms of game design, it focuses on providing an optimal gaming experience for the player, making it intuitive, engaging, enjoyable. It's centering your player rather than yourself. And so it always puts players first, and it goes beyond aesthetics. So it's not just make things look pretty. UI is not the same as UX, as every UX designer will tell you. But, and although visuals and aesthetics are essential, of course, but thinking about user-centered design means that we emphasize usability and accessibility and intuitive interactions, ensuring that players can just dive into the game without friction, or without unnecessary friction. Sometimes friction is intentional. It also reminds us about requesting feedback and iterating on our things. Good UX is, or good game design, really, good games development is iterative. It's an iterative process. And so feedback and iteration is about, it's having a continuous cycle where we gather player feedback, making sure that we refine things, we retest them, and we ensure that the end product that we've created actually resonates with our intended audience and offers the experience that they're looking for. User segmentation is a great tool as well that you can use. That's one example of how you categorize players. Here's another example. For those who might not be familiar, user segmentation is about analyzing your player base and guiding it based on your personas. So different kinds of players want different things. Different kinds of players are motivated by different things. Some people like civilization. They want slow games that I play at my own pace, focuses on strategy and using that big brain of mine. And then other games are more about, my favorite game, League of Legends, because I hate myself, is about teamwork and collaboration and high dopamine, high action all the time. Different people are motivated by different things. And so using user segmentation is kind of like it's the Myers-Briggs personality type of gamers. For those of you who know Myers-Briggs, never mind. So on Candy, we use this quite a fair bit. And so by implementing these things, we constantly had a focus on player behavior and analyzing what they want, what their preferences are, and getting feedback to enhance that. So we would use it to look at diverse demographics. So what are the different ranges of players? Candy is a game that is so broad in its target demographic. And so using segmentation is a good way to actually look at different kinds of players and different motivation types. Behavior, as I said. And then we'll tailor the in-game things based on these categorizations. It also helps us look at spending habits, which is important if you're in the free-to-play model. Not all players spend money in-game, and that's fine. Those who do, they will spend at different rates and be incentivized by different things. And so looking at spending habits of different personas and different parts of your segmentation model can help you analyze how you should design different features based on the motivations and the styles of that particular group of people. It helps us set progress and difficulty as well. Some features should be more complex, regardless of your game. Some things are aimed at more different kinds of players. Some things are not. Some things shouldn't be difficult. And so this also helps us keep tabs on what level of complexity that we're shooting for. And it also helps with feedback and reviews, because our feedback can also be segmented. Those who give good feedback are often the ones that we don't hear, and then ones who give bad feedback are always the ones that we listen to. And we shouldn't always do that. However, we should listen to your players. There's many different ways in which we play tested and that we got feedback. One very, very big one was A/B testing and looking at player telemetry and track all the things. Every single feature that we implemented, we would always look at the numbers and see how things were tracking. But there's other things as well. As a UX designer, I was often very focused more on things like player surveys, user interviews, and usability tests. Naturally, at King, we were very fortunate, and we were able to build a UX lab. And I personally haven't been able to use this lab because I moved to another company straight as this was launched. I'm very jealous. But that was the player-facing side, so players would come in and play on that, and then you would have, on the other side of that mirror, it's like in those TV shows when the cops are, and we would be able to sit there and watch and analyze and see what players are doing, because often many of our insights isn't just based on what players say, it's what they do. And players will say, I want this, I want this, I want this. I know for, on The Sims, player would say that, we want long hair, we want this, we want this. Was it long hair was a really big one, and different kinds of outfits. And we shouldn't just build exactly what they say they want. Listen, read between the lines. When they say they want long hair and different outfits and things, what they want is character customization. They want to be able to build things that actually represent themselves. So analyzing and watching your playtest is also very important, because players will say, I don't like this, I don't like this, I don't want that. And then you read between the lines, they're like, they're actually just frustrated because they don't get it. So do playtests, watch your playtests. There are so many times where, as a UX designer, I've been chatting to one of my game designers, and they've created this wonderful, elaborate game, and it is very detailed. It's walls of text, and you think, there is no way that players are going to get that. It's too complex. Players aren't going to get it. And this has happened on all the different projects, and that's not a bad thing. Designers are enthusiastic and excited, and I'm not your enemy. I'm excited about this as well. My job is to bring your excitement to the players. I want them to understand it. And so when I ask you to cut things or change things or whatever, it's not because I don't like it. It's because the players are probably not going to get it. And so often there's that little clash of egos where people get a little protective of their things, but then you make them watch play tests. Never had to argue with designers ever again. They'll see the thing and they'll go, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. Okay, yeah, we cut it, that's fine. But having an entire UX lab is a luxury, I'm aware, but there's lots of different ways in which you can do playtesting completely free, online. Obviously, there's free versions of playtesting, there's things that you pay for, there's a range based on what your budget is, what your resources are, and what your time frame is. Have a look on the internet, the options are endless. And it's important to playtest because, trust me, you have no idea how creatively others are going to interpret your very simple things. All right, so easy UX wins. Things that everyone can implement straight away. Visible feedback. So instead of you needing to find these out the hard way, here's little, like, the cheat codes. So how many times have you pressed something, unsure if anything happened? It's infuriating. I don't know if that actually is working or not. Always have visible feedback. Make sure that every action gets a response. Players should know when they've interacted with an element in the game. Have consistent UI elements. You wouldn't randomly change a street signs design in real life. Consistency is key. What this does is that it helps players keep their focus on the stuff that is actually important, the stuff that you want them to be focusing on, instead of getting distracted by other things or getting confused by stuff that is not really important here and now. So keep things consistent. Have clear tutorials. You know that overwhelming feeling of learning a new game with no guidance? Tutorials need to be clear, intuitive, and optional for veteran players. At least make them feel like you're not holding their hand. Players, myself included, we have an ego. I don't want anyone to tell me what to do. I want to feel like I figured it out myself. So make sure that your tutorials don't always feel like they're being handheld, unless it's intentional. Customizable control schemes. So everyone's unique and one-size-fits-all design doesn't always cut it. People have different accessibility needs, and make sure that people can adjust things to their liking and to their needs. It's easy. This is one of the easy ways to increase comfort and immersion and also allow all players to be able to access your games. Games are for everyone. And in that note, have accessible fonts and colors. Have you ever squinted trying to read something tiny? Ensure fonts are legible, contrasts are clear. Also, there are so many things that people don't think about they think that, oh, accessibility needs is for people in wheelchairs. Yes, absolutely. People in wheelchairs also play video games, newsflash. But it's not just that. If you consider the fact that most of, I can't say most, I don't know what the numbers are that. I can't say most adults wear glasses, but most adults have vision that deteriorates as they get older. And I think, was it 8%, 10% of men are colorblind, I think was 8% was, yep. What's that? All people. Oh, I thought it was lower within women, but I'm going to trust you on that one. Consider that many people, like there's such a massive part of your player base that have different accessibility needs, and accessibility means so many different things. Make sure that everyone gets to enjoy your game. And designing things simply from the beginning often doesn't need to require extra effort. And the reason why I put this in as easy UX wins is because this isn't a thing that you should tack on when you've already designed your entire game, and then you need to tack on things at the end. Yeah, then I understand then accessibility doesn't get prioritized. But if you prioritize these from the beginning, when you're choosing your two colors, or you're not just colors because you shouldn't just base it on colors, but when you're choosing your two options, if you do that mindful of accessibility needs from the beginning, choosing color scheme A or color scheme B takes just as much effort But having to redo your color scheme at the end, that's double the effort. Intuitive menus and navigation. So fumbling through confusing menus is a mood killer. Keep things simple. Again, you want players to be focusing on what they actually need to be focusing on. Players should be able to find what they need without a second thought. If I have to think about what it is I need to be doing, it's not working. I want to be able to click through things and never have to stop and wonder, I just need to figure out where my next quest is. Where are my quests? How do I change my weapons? Stuff should be intuitive. And have clear error messages. So cryptic error messages can be confusing as well. It's not working. Cool. Why? I don't know. It's not working. Why? Tell me why it's not working. Ideally, when something goes wrong, we want to know how to fix it. Same thing goes for video games. Same thing goes for players. It's about clarity. Many of these things I was going to talk about in detail, but because Celia is actually here and is wonderful, and many of the things that I talk about in some of my other talks are very much references to her work. So read her books, go see her talks. She's speaking, she's wonderful. Another thing I highly, highly encourage you to do is to speak to a lot of the accessibility organizations that work with these things. I did an accessibility training course with Able Gamers that was incredible and changed my entire way of thinking. It made me realize halfway through the workshop that I was like, oh, this applies to me as well. I am a disabled gamer. I hadn't even realized. And so I highly, highly recommend, if you have the budget or the affordances to be able to do this training, please, please do it. They're also wonderful people. What they also have, though, if you don't have the budget to do an entire workshop, is the cards that you can get online, and they will actually talk you through all the different accessibility things that you should be thinking of when designing. Because, again, when you take these things into consideration from the beginning, they are cheap, they're easy, and that is the free version rather than having to redo things at the end. Easy peasy. So, final thoughts. That, by the way, is another reference to UX is Fine, another great UX company. Also highly recommend, wonderful people. Because that's what, us as UX designers, this is our life all the time. Everything is always on fire, but it's fine. Everything's fine. So, before we save and exit, games have the power to change people's lives, as Stefan was saying in the introduction. And as game designers, or game developers, sorry, we have the responsibility to use that power for good. Wield that power responsibly. Embrace the challenges of creating games that are accessible, inclusive, and meaningful. Prioritize things that actually mean things and aren't just about the stuff that you want to do because you think it's cool. Prioritize stuff that is actually going to make someone stop and think about why they love video games. And sometimes it's just making demons go bang. That's fine. And challenge yourselves. Be open to feedback. Be willing to make changes based on player input. Asking for feedback makes it easier to receive it. So create a culture of welcoming feedback. It helps you not get defensive straight away when someone goes, this thing you made, this thing is broken. You go, oh, but I made it. But if you instead create the space to open that conversation, you go to people and you go, hey, tell me everything you hate about this. It's going to be so much easier, and they'll be nicer as well, because they'll be like, no, but I love it. And you're like, yeah, I know. But seriously, tell me how to make it better. And it's always good, because we want to make things better. Use the principles of user-centered design and cognitive psychology, and create games that are engaging and satisfying for all players. Be ready to pivot based on player insights. Be ready to put your ego aside and create something that someone else really, really wants to play. Because when I'm making games, I'm not the one who pays for my rent. I need you to want to buy my games so that I can pay rent. It's in my interests that I make sure that other people enjoy my games. And lastly, be bold, be creative. Never stop pushing the boundaries of what games can be. Stay curious and keep learning about new technologies, game design trends, player preferences. And take pride in your work. Recognize the value and importance of what you do. remember, you're not just creating games. We're shaping culture and society. Aim to create games that have a positive impact on the world and inspire people to be their best selves. So, thank you very much. Great, no questions. Excellent. Thanks. A question, yes.
So, besides Celia Bowden, are there any other authors on UX that you remember? Like, they shaped your way of thinking so much that you still remember the book. Are there any of those you can share?
This is going to be such a cliche thing. My partner's in the front row, and he will attest to this. I literally carry Celia's book, the little one, The Psychology of Video Game. Like, I carry that one in my bag all the time. Sorry. Yes. The question was, apart from Celia, are there any other books that you can recommend? Off the top of my head, no, because that is the one in the middle there. I mean, the one on the left is the one that goes into all the big, the nitty-gritty, and if you're really invested in analyzing like how players think and why they analyze, why they react the way they do, what helps you remember things as an ADHD nutball that remembers nothing. But if you want the distilled version, well, it's a different book, different messaging. But like a smaller book that is kind of my little go-to of stuff that I should be remembering, that's the little one there in the middle. I know that's not what you asked, but like, it's my favorite. She's my favorite. Don't tell her. Also, thank you for reminding me, the other thing I was asked to say at the end as well is to please fill out the speaker surveys. Thank you. Yes. Hi.
Well, most of the is we playtest each other games, we do not playtest with players itself.
Yeah.
So how do you use the community of game devs to help us into this playtesting process without making it locking on our own references? How to spread this knowledge of playtesting to the players itself, since we do not have content with that?
Sorry.
Because most of our playtesting, we make other game devs playing our own games. So we have the feedback from the game devs, not from the players itself. How to filter these things? How to filter the opinion of another game dev and the opinion of the player itself?
Okay, so the question was, correct me if I misinterpreted this. The question was, as game devs, it's easy for us to often go to other game devs for our playtesting. And so how do we actually stop doing that and find actual players who are not game developers and test with them? Is that correct? Thanks. So some of the online tools that I posted, like Playtest Cloud, they will do that. There's also, I think Steam has a really good function as well, where you can playtest things through Steam, because I know Playtest Cloud is mobile focused. There's also going to like conventions. Conventions where there is because conferences are dev focused, and then conventions are player focused. So go there, bring your game as a little prototype. Bring an NDA, make sure people have signed it, and actually ask people to play there, but also consider who you have in your network. Think about who your target demographic is. Most of the time, it's not your mom. Your mom's going to love everything you make. Unless she is the target demographic, then absolutely test it on your mom. But try and think about, like, who do you have within your network? I do this all the time, where I go, all right, great, we're working on an FPS. I am not an FPS player, so I already know my opinion is pretty irrelevant most of the time. I can have an insight based on my skills and my experience, but what do players actually want to be doing here and now? My opinion is irrelevant, and so I go to my friends, sign an NDA, and if they're within the target demographic, And that's the user segment of like the kind of player that we are targeting. I ask them to come over and actually playtest it there. Come into the studio, or if they are unable, get permission to playtest at home. I don't know what kind of a studio you work at, but I'm working at a small studio, or smaller studio now than EA. But it means that I have a little bit more freedom that I can actually do playtests at home with friends as well. So there's options. If you think about like, where are people on social media? Do posts. I know that the UX researchers on Candy, they put a survey, a little like opt-in survey in the game, asking for playtesters. And they thought, like, this was Sophie, she's wonderful, in case anyone knows her. She put in a little opt-in thing about like, hey, could we get your thoughts on like playtesting, putting in a little survey, and we thought we'd get hopefully a few people, and the form crashed within an hour. She had to close it. People want to have opinions on stuff, so put posts out on social media, get out there. TikTok, there's heaps of people doing things. I am not a TikToker, I don't know, I shouldn't be allowed on that dopamine machine. But there's so many different places where people who play games hang out. Go to those spaces and just ask people. People love to share their opinions. Sometimes it's good, again, I'm going to tack on an extra answer. Be mindful as well of what opinions you should listen to and what you should discard. Again, it goes back to the thing of analyzing player behavior. So many times in your playtest, people will say, I hate this, this is confusing, I don't want that, oh, I want this, I want this, I want this. And sometimes that's correct. Sometimes, though, discard all of that because they're talking out their ass, and that's fine. Or sometimes it's, okay, I'm actually realizing what you're frustrated by is this instead. So yeah, just tacking on a little bonus thing for when you playtest. That was a long answer, I'm sorry. Yeah, hi.
Hey, I found it really interesting that you're working on board games. Do you find that there's a difference between gamer experience when it's kind of in this physical world as opposed to digital, or is there an overlap of the psychology behind it?
So the question was about board games and the difference between making board games and making digital games. Straight away, I can say stress level is the biggest difference for me. When we ship a board game like that goes out into the wild, and I never need to know what anyone's opinion on that is. That's out there. That's your problem now. You bought it, your problem. But with digital games, we are constantly listening to our player feedback, and it's digital, and we have social medias, and we have all our communities. We have community managers whose literal job it is, by the way, speak to your community managers. They are amazing. They know what your players want. That's another thing. If you don't have access to playtesting, speak to your community managers. They'll have insights for you. But yeah, community managers are constantly fielding people's opinions on your product. So I think that, for me, is my biggest difference. But that is a good and a bad, because that means that we don't have an ongoing dialogue. And the reason why I stuck with digital games is because I realized that I actually really love the dialogue between the games and, like, I guess, between the game designer and the game players. Because I like watching people go from, like, oh, I have no idea, no, this is confusing, to like, oh, I get it. Like in our game with Metal in the beginning, because it's, for those who don't know, it's a heavy metal rhythm shooter. And the first time you play it, you're just like, I don't know what to do, because when I see Demon go, then I go bang straight away. But it's a rhythm shooter, so you have to do things on beat. You have to constantly be doing things to the music. And so I tell people, when people are like, I don't know how to play, I say, headbang. That's my biggest piece of advice for people playing Metal, headbang. And it's like people start doing it, and they're like, okay. And that moment when players go, oh, I get it. Like, that's so cool. Yeah, that's the bit that, like, that's the bit that makes me excited. That's the bit that really makes me remember why I do. And I think that's why I stuck with digital games, because you can have that ongoing dialogue. And also, games are, the entire purpose of games is to make people happy. we have so many things that are stressful and angry. Like, don't even open the internet because it's just like one anxiety attack after the other. But you should be watching the news. But don't. And the thing is, like, games are also important. And my parents have asked me several times, so Anna, like, when are you going to get a real job? And I'm like, I'm good at what I do. People care about my things, Dad. I have a real job. I work for a big company, and I work on The Sims. That's a big game. That is a real job. But what he realized after a while as well is that, like, games are important. And I think that was really drilled into him during the pandemic, where people had nothing else going on in their lives, for the most part, besides the misery and the stress and all of the things that were happening around the world. And that's where we realized the importance of games. And it's reminding us that there is good stuff out there, and also it's an empathy tool. It's letting players have experiences that are so different from their own. So yeah, having that thing and seeing what makes people tick, I think, is my biggest thing. I've spoken for too long. Next question. You should take me off the stage. One more question. Yes? So that was one. I was going through the segmentation models that we have at King, and because I wanted to use that as an example, because the researcher team did such a good job at creating personas and creating segmentation profiles, but I'm obviously not allowed to share those because they were internal. But to reiterate the question, sorry, the question was about user segmentation models, if I have a favorite, and if you should use an existing one or make up your own. There are wonderful tools. The latest one, the Newzoo one that I had a screenshot of, that one is really, really good. That one's got updated information about how the way that we see, like, the archetype of, like, the gamer, the hardcore gamer, is completely different today than what it was just a few years ago. The way that we consume games is different. So I would absolutely use that one as an example, but also build your own personas. Those personas should guide what is important for your game. So in terms of segmentation models, you can use existing tools, but for personas, I would probably encourage, you can find templates and things, but craft those around your own game. And it's hard when you want to share the stuff that you've been working on. Like, I can't share so many of the things, but there's really good resources online. So hopefully you can find some. Cool, thank you. Thank you.